Coming up on Tech News Weekly, the Zuckerberg World Tour continues. Also, what all of those privacy policy emails that you've surely been getting in your inbox, what do those mean? Brian Chen's going to tell you all about that. There's also an incognito web browser that promises complete online anonymity, different from the rest. And finally, we stumble upon the end of Stumble Upon. All that more coming up next on Tech News Weekly.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Weekly is brought to you by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 33, recorded Thursday, May 24th, 2018.
Welcome to Tech News Weekly. This is the show where we talk to the people making and breaking the tech news. I'm Megan Maroney.
I'm Jason Howell, making and breaking it today. Although every week, I guess, it's just kind of what we do here. And let's start things off. We're going to talk a little bit about Facebook because, as you may or may not have known, Zuckerberg's kind of been under the microscope lately. Once upon a time, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg went to Washington to field pointed questions directed at him from the House and the Senate. And now, a few weeks later, he went overseas to meet with European Union officials and answer their questions ahead of tomorrow's official implementation of Europe's new General Data Protection Regulation. You might see that as GDPR. And joining us to talk about all the questions Zuckerberg did and didn't really answer is Kurt Wagner from Recode. How's it going?
Hi, guys.
It's great to have you here, Kurt. Appreciate you coming on the show. So, first of all, what was the purpose of this meeting, and how is it different, if at all, from that of what Zuckerberg kind of faced when he had the public grilling here in the U.S. a few weeks back?
I think it was really similar. I mean, the way it was framed was, hey, we're going to have this meeting for him to show up and better clarify Facebook's data practices and data policies. So I think, this is an example of politicians wanting their time in front of Zuckerberg, getting their opportunity to ask their questions. But I think the purpose was very similar. It was, we want him here to kind of better explain what Facebook actually does, because there's clearly a lot of people who still don't understand all of that.
All right. So talk a little bit about the format, because this is definitely a little bit different. It seemed like there were a lot of questions flying his way, but in many ways, he was kind of able to sidestep them a little bit. And I saw a lot of criticism online as a result of that. What was so different about the format, the approach here, and how could they have done it maybe a little better to get him to answer those specific questions?
The format was a huge problem, in my opinion. So the whole meeting was supposed to take an hour and 15 minutes. It ultimately went a little longer than that. But the first, I would say, hour of the meeting, let's go ahead and strip out the opening statements because those don't really count. Let's say 45 minutes or so of the meeting was these EU regulators just asking Zuckerberg questions without giving him any chance to reply. So by the time he ultimately started to answer the questions, he had like 40 of them to talk about. And so, and he had about 20 minutes to do it. And so what he did was say like, okay, I think there were a few questions about our data policies. And then he'd go into some, kind of broad pre-rehearsed answer that would kind of blanket all of the very specific questions that he had been asked. So, in some ways it was kind of frustrating because he didn't really answer any of the questions that they asked. In the other ways, that's just how the format lent itself. It's like they basically said, here's a very tough question. Don't answer it for 20 minutes and answer it along with a bunch of other stuff that we already asked you. So ultimately, everyone got really frustrated and said, hey, we asked these questions, you didn't answer them. And I think a lot of that is because of the format of how this was set up.
Now, whose idea was it to have it in that format?
They asked afterwards in the president of the EU Parliament, which is the group that conducted this meeting. He said that his name is Antonio Tanaji, I think. I'm apologizing because I'm mispronouncing his name, I'm sure. But he said it was his pitch to Facebook and that, it was their idea to get him there. I'm sure the way that these things usually work is that the team, Zuckerberg's team's working behind the scenes to figure out, hey, what's a format that they're willing to agree to. But it sounded like the EU Parliament was the one who pitched this idea, and certainly Zuckerberg took advantage of it.
So we often heard when Zuckerberg was in front of the House and the Senate, we heard that statement, we'll get back to you with the information. Many times we heard this about missing information, or maybe it was just a great way to delay and not answer things right then so that they could get their message together. Did that happen, and will that happen here? I guess what I'm wondering is, when they say they're going to get back with that information, how does that actually take place, if at all? Or is that just a great way for questions to, ride off into the sunset and die?
Well, it's a great way for everyone to forget what the questions were, and for, someone with a lot more time on their hands to come in and perfectly phrase and kind of package together the answers to these questions. The company did publish the answers to a lot of them yesterday on, I think it was the Facebook Brussels page. And so I was reading through them, but, it just really loses a lot of the luster when, it's the same reason as a journalist. You don't mail or email all of your questions to a source. You want to hear someone answer them in the moment. You want to hear how they react, right? Like, do they pause? Do they stumble? Do they have trouble answering the question? And you don't get any of that when you're just simply, putting them in writing. And so we did see technically some of them being answered, but I don't think it really carried the same weight as having Mark Zuckerberg do it on the spot right there on video in front of all of these politicians.
And so did he say he was sorry?
He did say he was sorry, but he's been saying sorry for a while now. So I'm not really sure that at this point, I think we know he's sorry. I think it's more of a, well, what happens next kind of a situation.
Yeah, what are you going to do about your sorry?
Right.
What would you say were some of the standout kind of questions, whether he decided to answer them in reality or not? It kind of sounded like they had more direct, more almost critical questions. They took a much more critical stance. What were some of those questions?
Yeah, it did feel that way. And it could have just been that, they were able to ask without him kind of interjecting. So, it felt more of like a pile on, but I do think there were some smart questions. There were some about, Facebook's kind of monopoly power. We heard a little bit of that in front of U.S. Congress, but here it was emphasized this notion of actually breaking Facebook up and saying, hey, should WhatsApp be its own business? Should Messenger or Instagram be their own businesses? And so that was presented. There was also a question about, what are referred to, I should say, as shadow profiles. This notion that Facebook collects data on people even when they're not using the service, and holds on to that data so that when they eventually sign up, Facebook already knows who they are. That again kind of was talked about very briefly during the U.S. congressional testimonies that he did, but it was brought up again yesterday. And one of the reasons it stood out to me was that it was not something he chose to talk about in his 20 minutes of answers, right? So he gets his 40 minutes of questions. He just starts blanket answering all of them. He doesn't mention shadow profiles. Someone kind of calls out, says, hey, the shadow profile thing, what about that? And he basically dismissed it and immediately moved on to something else. So it was clearly not something that he wanted to talk about. So, there were a couple, those would have been good things for us to hear from him directly. And we didn't really get that opportunity again because of the way that the format was set up. Mm-hmm.
So one of the glaring inconsistencies between advertising on the web and advertising on TV or in newspapers, political advertising, is that it has to be labeled as such everywhere except for on Facebook. But you have a piece today about how that might be changing in terms of political ads.
It is changing. So Facebook is now going to label all political ads that you see on the service. You're going to be able to click and see who paid for the ad, who saw the ad. So, was it men or women? Where did they live? What age demographic do they fall into? And then you're going to be able to see what other ads that same advertiser has bought on the service. And so this whole thing is meant to prevent another situation like we saw in 2016 when there were kind of Russian trolls that bought political ads to try and influence voter behavior, and no one, was really aware who was buying them and what they were trying to accomplish. So this whole notion of like making ads more transparent, especially when it comes to political ads, is not just something Facebook's doing, but obviously they are the most high profile given everything that happened in 2016. And today, they've talked about this before, but today they're actually rolling it out.
Man, that's kind of crazy. They were showing Josh was showing off the kind of animated GIF of the motion through it, actually pulling up the funding behind the ad down to the numbers. That's actually kind of remarkable that they're pulling open the curtain so wide on something that's so secretive usually.
It should, and to their credit, it shouldn't be secret. I mean, that's the whole idea of kind of these campaign finance laws, is to make sure that you don't have some mysterious mystery person, funding a candidate or whatever. And on Facebook, clearly they were able to do that in the past, and now they shouldn't be able to moving forward. But Facebook has said we're going to lose money on political ads. The amount of kind of cost to do this technology, to monitor and review and do everything, is apparently going to outweigh whatever they make from selling these ads. So that's what they're claiming, at least, and that's their way of saying, hey, we're taking this very seriously. But yeah, it is interesting that you can see, kind of not down to the cent, of course, but you can see generally how much these ad campaigns are going for.
Sure.
So you're telling me they're not going to charge more for those ads now at some point?
Well, you know what? I'm not sure if the way that the ad system works is kind of this like, market auction-based thing. I assume it's the same for political ads, right? So they will probably sell for as much as the market dictates. Knowing how targeted you can be on Facebook, it does seem likely that at some point those ads will probably go up in cost. But Facebook claims, hey, we're losing money on this. We're just doing it because we want to be as transparent as possible. So.
And what do they mean by political ads? Is it just for political candidates, or is it for political topics or organizations? Like, how do they define what a political ad is?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a really tough question to answer because there are what are called issue ads, which are ads that are either promoting or condemning a particular stance, right? So gun control or abortion or education or whatever it may be, those might not be promoting a specific candidate. They might be promoting an issue. And those have historically been harder to identify, right? Because that's a very subjective thing. And so what Facebook has said it's going to do is basically monitor for those. And if an ad about they have a list of 20 topics, abortion is one of them, education, guns. So any ad that touches on guns will theoretically, they will look at and they will say, okay, well, is this actually promoting, is this a store? Is this your local sporting goods store that's promoting the sale of a gun? Although I don't actually think you could probably do that on Facebook. This is a terrible example. But that would be different than someone saying, hey, we need gun reform, right? So the idea being, can you separate ones that are political in nature versus just ads that are in the same category but don't have a political spin to them? That's what Facebook's going to attempt to do, and it's going to be really hard because, again, that's a very subjective thing to be measuring and kind of deciding, especially at the scale and volume that they're going to have to do it at.
Sure. Now, shifting gears just a little bit, you also wrote about the fact that Facebook executives are apparently they're lifers, essentially, at the company. Talk a little bit about why that's unique. And I'm sure Facebook, in comparison to a lot of other companies facing the scrutiny that they're facing right now, you're saying in your piece that it would make sense that this would be the time if they wanted to jump ship, but no one's doing that. Why are they sticking around?
Yeah, I've wanted to write this story for a long time because I've been covering Facebook for a number of years. And if you look at their top ranks, almost everyone has been there for a decade or longer. And that's just crazy in the world of technology and the amount that people kind of come and go at these tech companies these days. I always thought that was kind of bizarre, and I wanted to dig into it a little bit more. And then they had a major reorganization about 2 weeks ago where a bunch of those people actually took on new roles and they reported to new people and everything got restructured and nobody left. And I was like, you know what, that would have been the perfect time for someone to leave amidst all of that change. People might not have even noticed, everyone's getting new jobs and someone slips out the back door and maybe you kind of forget, or at the very least it gets buried by everything else, and no one did. And so, I had the chance to talk to a bunch of them. And again, because I've wanted to write this for such a long time, I've been kind of collecting anecdotes and string about this for some time. But really it comes down to, in my opinion, two things. One is that these folks are honestly so gung-ho about Facebook mission of connecting everybody. Like, it sounds corny, and I agree, but they just absolutely are diehard Facebook disciples, and they think that Facebook is, has this broad mission in the world, and they have a chance to impact billions of people with everything that they do. And so there's that element, and then there's this element of like, hey, we've been working together for 10 years. This person that I sit next to isn't just a colleague of mine; they're actually friends. They vacation together, they hang out together, their spouses are close. So there's this element of kind of family about that, and having talked to a bunch of them, you really started to hear that come through consistently. And so I decided to, write this story and try to give people on the outside a sense of like, why are these people still here? They've made a lot of money. They certainly don't need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. That stood out in your article. It's like, it's probably not money at this point. They don't need that money anymore.
Right.
If they've been there that long at a company like Facebook, they're doing all right. It's about that greater mission. We've heard, Zuckerberg has said that time and time again, even before what we're going through now. But that's been his kind of, his cry over the last, however many years, that this is bigger than just a company. This is about a mission to, do all of these crazy world shaping things and shaping the world they are right now, for better or for worse. But hey, maybe they can do more, make more of a difference, more of an impact inside than they do outside. Or maybe leaving is a signal that things got kind of hot in the kitchen,
That could be. I mean, I'm waiting. This isn't going to last forever, right? Yeah. It's hard to imagine we'll be sitting here even in 2, 3, 4 more years, and all of those people will still be there. And I kind of wonder, when the first person does choose to leave, what that kind of domino effect is going to be like. Again, because they are very close, they've worked together for such a long time. I could imagine it being kind of a house of cards type of situation where if one important person leaves, it could start to unravel a little bit. I mean, culture, as you guys I'm sure know, like who you work with really makes a huge difference. And Facebook's been fortunate, I think, to have these people stick around as long as they have. So it'll be interesting to see how much longer that crew stays together.
Absolutely. Kurt Wagner with Recode, recode.net. Always appreciate getting you on, Kurt. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Awesome. Yeah, of course. Thanks very much. Take care.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Levitating bonsai trees and 3D headphones that you never actually see. Those are just a few things you can use your hard-earned cash to back on Kickstarter. But what about a cookie-free, virus-free, history-free virtual private browser that promises complete online anonymity and security? We've got the man who's behind that with us today. Welcome, Scott Shaffer, founder of TraceFree.
Thank you, guys. Thanks.
So
I saw your lead in with data privacy, and I thought it was kind of apropos about sharing data.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Our entire show today is kind of along this topic.
All about privacy. So first, explain what TraceFree is beyond what I just said. That's basically your marketing copy. So tell us what it is.
Okay, it's a special built browser. It runs in the cloud in a container. And what it does, it keeps you anonymous and completely secure throughout the whole process from your device to the website. You're seeing a lot of, I think, misinformation with incognito, VPN, encryption, and they've kind of bastardized these words into letting people think that they're private and secure when they're not. And about a year ago, we said, when the government said internet providers can sell and share your data, we said we have to do something about this because they were promoting VPNs. So we built something really special. And in our Kickstarter campaign, we actually we go head to head with the highest rated VPN and show you why you're not private or secure. It's very easy to see that you're not using your device or your browser. So there is no way you can get cookies, viruses, or browsing history when you surf. And going back to your data policy, your privacy, the best way to keep track of your data and make sure it's never shared or sold is don't give the website, don't give it to them. And that's what we do. We allow you to control what, if any, data you give to a website. And it's, I think we're changing browsing because you see Twitter and Facebook with their privacy policies, but we've never seen one for the web user. So we actually created one with the TraceFree browser. So you basically tell when you land on a website, it overrides their privacy policy. And you basically tell them, you can't see my identity, you can't see my device, and you can't see my location. I choose what information, if any, I want to give to you.
So this is all happening in the cloud, from what I understand, right?
Yes.
My computer is not connecting directly to the site on the other end. It's going up to TraceFree servers that are anonymizing it and then sending that request out and back. What about lag? What about trust? Because there you are you're the guys that are kind of in the middle there, and people have to, obviously your users have to trust you. This is a security-minded product. How can you talk about that?
Two things. One, you're our customer. You're not data. And that's what a lot of people, Facebook, Twitter, you're data to them. You're not a customer. So privacy is number one to us. The second thing, if you understood how the browsing session works, you would understand that it's almost impossible to identify who you are. It would be the easiest analogy is when you go to the supermarket and you go to get some bologna, you pull the little number, the temporary number. Well, they would have to know what supermarket, in what state, at what time, what number you pull that tag, because it's a temporary browsing session. It's deleted when you're gone, and you start with a brand new one next time you log in. And it could be one time you're in New York City, next you're in Chicago. So to target you, it would be very, very difficult.
Okay, so you've built it, and we presume that it works. Why Kickstarter? Why are you doing the Kickstarter campaign?
Two reasons. One, exposure. We have two goals with the funding. Is one, we want to finish the Mac version. It's running great in the lab right now, but we want to put a couple things on it. And two, we want to put it TraceFree on a couple of strategic servers in the world. There's certain areas in the world that would we want to replace the VPN. We think we can do that.
So a lot of this is happening in the cloud, and that adds extra steps. And I know with VPN, we're kind of used to the fact that because of the way the technology works, it can slow things down. It can slow down your speeds. What is the effect that using TraceFree has on a browsing session, as one example?
None. You have a delay about 5 to 7 seconds when you connect to our server. Outside of that, you wouldn't have any idea that you were surfing in the cloud.
So what is your background? Like what possessed you to want to do this besides just being interested in protecting people's privacy?
Finance, and then I got into some angel investing. Then I saw a real big need coming with the internet, and that people are now finally starting to realize that privacy is a really big deal. I don't think people are quite getting yet what it really means to have your data out there. And between, Comcast is now, they're looking for additional revenue sources, so they're throttling bandwidth. The next thing that's coming is they're going to start selling your browsing history. I think it's kind of a given. So you're going to have to pay to be unlisted to a Comcast or a Verizon. So what we saw was, okay, VPN does an okay job, but there's still a lot of holes there that we can fill. And what we do with how we replace a VPN is they throttle your data. They do allow you to get access to sites, but they throttle your data, still leave cookies, browsing history on the device. There's nothing. All 4 points. You have the device, the browser, the provider, and the website. All 4 points we protect. We keep you anonymous and secure. All 4 points. No one else can say that.
So, and I'm very familiar with kind of how the VPN, on one hand, people trust that VPN does all these things, wherein, when you really look at it closer, there's a lot of places where it can fall apart and fail if somebody wants true privacy and that obscurity online, let's say. What about Tor? Like, how would you compare the experience of TraceFree and the security benefits of TraceFree against Tor, which many people would say is one of the better ways to obscure your presence online right now.
Okay, go to Tor and then go to whatismybrowser.com. Use Tor and go to whatismybrowser.com. You will see that your device is detected. Mm-hmm. You're not private, you're not secure. And in doing so, you've gone to how many computers have you touched in order to get to the final end. And a lot of websites now are basically blocking Tor because they see all these different IP. But I kind of like to think of Tor as the Napster of this generation, mm-hmm. where people were sharing their music, and now they're sharing their PCs just to get a different IP address.
So I have my own answer to this question, but what do you say to people who are like, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. I don't care. Why would I need this?
Okay, if you want an Italian restaurant in your area, fine, go to Google. They'll pull up that information. But what if you divorce, bankruptcy, health issues? Do you want Google to know everything you do? Everything you do?
No.
Okay.
No.
And,
none of those things are going to happen, Scott.
Well, okay. You look at again. Not to get too crude here, but the restroom. You have more privacy in an airport restroom than you do in your own home.
That's true.
Yeah, there's
especially
absolutely
with mine that's covered with Amazon Alexas.
Yes, especially based on the news today that Amazon Alexa is calling everybody with calling the microphone data. So there's a lot going on in the background here. It's not just the browser, obviously. It's the servers in the cloud that you're connecting to. Is there any sort of subscription fee or kind of recurring fee that people would have to pay in order to maintain access to the servers?
Yeah. It's a software program, subscription, $5 a month. We have some neat features that we have in the lab that we're going to roll out. But for right now, it's $5 a month. Mac is coming very soon. Windows works right now. So I think the biggest market where people do the most private surfing is with a PC and a laptop. So we want to get those products out first.
So if you have a PC, if you're running Windows, you can use it now? You can subscribe now?
Yep, you can subscribe right now. It's running right now. The Kickstarter campaign, what we're telling people is annual backers or greater. As soon as the campaign is over, give you a license key. You could do beta test it until we turn the annual subscription on, which should be a couple months. But any annual backer on Kickstarter gets it as soon as the campaign's over.
Nice.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Scott, and telling us about TraceFree. The best place to learn more is tracefree.com?
Tracefree.com. We got the link to the Kickstarter right there in the front. And thank you, guys. I apologize for the confusion.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much.
Totally fine. We appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us, Scott.
Thank you, guys.
So before we get to our next interview, I'd like to let you know that I've updated my privacy policy.
Oh, you have? Okay. Would you send me an email with that information? Because I've been waiting and I'm not getting any of those right now.
Here's what it says. Because we care about your personal information, blah, 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 blah. That is a dramatic recreation of me reading all of the privacy policy emails that I've been getting. And then I immediately delete them. And our next guest explains why we should not be doing that. Welcome, Brian X. Chen, lead consumer technology writer for the New York Times.
Hey, Megan. Good to be back. How are you?
I'm good, except for apparently I've been doing all the wrong things by deleting all of those emails that I've been getting. But first, I for those who might still be wondering or just noticed that they were getting all these messages right now, explain a little bit about the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR.
There's a lot of legalese, and it gets kind of complicated. And honestly, it's probably going to be a big mess in the next few weeks as different companies try to comply with this new law. But basically, it's a pretty tough law that affects the European Union, where basically these are the two main principles. It's just the first principle is that the companies need your consent to collect your data. And the second big one is that you should only be required to share data that is necessary to make the services work. So, for example, if you wanted to get a birthday cake, you have to tell the birthday cake company when your birth date is and your name in order to say, happy birthday, Brian, on this certain day or whatever. But if there's unnecessary information, then they need to let you be able to opt out of sharing that information, like say your work history or whatever is totally irrelevant to the product that they're serving. So that's basically the main gist of GDPR in a nutshell.
Okay, so you're getting as many emails. I bet you're getting even more emails than I am because you work at the New York Times. So are you really reading all of them, Brian?
No, I'm not reading all of them. I'm saying because I'm getting a lot of emails from services I don't even use, which is weird. So I ignore those for sure. But I would say for the services that you actually care about, that you use all the time, like say, for example, Twitter, Facebook, etc., you should probably at least skim the email, because at the very least, they give you a summary of the new controls that you're able to access in terms of controlling the data that you're sharing. There are some new controls in terms of like turning things off, like the information you're sharing with advertisers or the information that can be collected about you and be potentially shared with third parties that you're unaware of. This is all like useful stuff that you wouldn't know about, and you might leave on. You might keep on sharing this information if you don't bother to read this email. So that's the main purpose of why I say people should be reading them.
And in some cases, these are being written in a way that says, like, if you do nothing, then that acts as your consent for us to continue doing what we're doing. Or like on one hand, I feel like in light of all of this and the reasons behind it, they should be required to say your explicit action to tell us this is okay is what we're looking for. Or is that the case? And I'm missing the point.
Well, it's funny because the way that things used to work, which the entire purpose of this law is to prevent things like, well, just by using this site, you agree to our terms of service, right? That's kind of how things have worked before. The difference now is that people need to give their explicit consent, right? So they need to click a button saying, okay, I'm okay with these new rules or this data collection that I'm doing. And what you're going to be seeing, if you haven't seen it already, is different companies interpreting this law in different ways and complying in different ways. So some of them are using, say, pop-up notifications when you browse their websites that say, here's how cookies work. By clicking OK or continuing to use the site, then you agree to these terms. Some people are sending emails that say, here's a new privacy policy. And by the way, by continuing to use this site, you agree to these new terms, which isn't really how GDPR, it's not really intended. It's not really what the lawmakers want, but a lot of people are kind of interpreting it their own way and complying with that rule, like however they really want. I think it's gonna shake out kind of in an interesting way in the coming weeks.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is that if their new privacy policy update comes in a pop-up and you click agree, then you are giving consent. But if you're just not reading the email and deleting it, they can't say that that's consent, right?
They might try to argue that. That's the thing that's kind of hairy right now, because the way that the regulations are written is it says that if there's a type of data collection that's kind of tricky, you need to get consent from the user. And I think some companies are still going to try to make you give consent by simply sending you an email and saying you're giving consent by using the website, even though I think technically they're not supposed to do that. I'm already seeing some people try that still.
Now, one thing that this kind of reminds me of is in the world of smartphones, we give explicit consent for things when we install an app and it says, hey, would you like to grant access to your contacts, because we really need that for the operation of this app. And what we found over the years is that many times, like, that's just not necessary, but they ask for it anyways, and we do it because for the same reason that we click OK on a lot of these things online. Does the GDPR actually apply to the smartphone side of things as well? Is it widespread? And if so, are we going to start seeing these things inside of applications going forward?
So far, at least in my experience, anecdotally, I'm seeing it more on the websites and email from the companies themselves. I'm not seeing it so much in the apps. Are you, by any chance? Because I think it's still kind of trickling out.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really seen any in the apps, and I'm not really entirely sure exactly how those would surface. I mean, a lot of these apps are represented also on the web, so it would make sense that if they had your contact information, they'd email this in the way that they have been. But also when you're talking about apps, there's a whole lot of people creating millions of apps for their users that I imagine could fall under the purview of this, or does it target bigger organizations versus like the small mom and pop sort of organizations that churn out apps?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. So something that people have raised is another issue is that big companies are going to have an easier time redesigning their applications and different parts of their software in order to comply with GDPR, and people with fewer resources might have a harder time doing so. And the penalties are pretty big, right? It's like 4% of overall revenue you make each year could be taken from you if you don't comply with this rule. So, I mean, so far, at least what I'm seeing in terms of applications is I vaguely recall Google Maps showing a notification saying like there's an updated privacy policy. Here's the gist of what it's about. You can read the whole thing here if you want, but you have to click OK in order to continue using Google Maps. That's one example of a big company using the notification to comply with the new rule inside an application.
Well, you bring up a good point is that I was trying to think of, have I seen them in any apps? And I think it's just something that, you know, I've just become so used to that, and especially when when you're talking about deleting emails from your inbox, that's an action that you have to take to clean it out. Anyway, I practice inbox 0, so it's important to me to get rid of them. But if you're talking about trying to get an app that you want to use and you want to use it right then, like I would have no idea because I just click agree all the time. Maybe I should focus more on paying attention to that than I should on my inbox 0. But we'll see.
Well, I think just, you know, I think the most that people can do right now is just learn about what some of the new data tools are in terms of your privacy controls, because for a lot of these services, the controls have greatly expanded and you're able to opt out of a lot more than you used to. And I think that's really the most important thing. You know, this whole issue of opting in or giving consent, it's kind of hairy, but I think we can let the regulators deal with that eventually. But for now, as consumers, I think we should just be paying attention to the privacy controls.
And are you seeing any big apps or websites that are just offering these to people in the EU, or has everything you've seen been privacy controls? The GDPR privacy controls are for everyone.
You know, it's tricky. I tried to so I used a VPN. I tried to change my IP address to London and log into Facebook and see if I got a different Facebook, and it looked exactly the same. So I think for the most part, it's supposed to be the same experience for people both in the UK and the US, or I mean in Europe and the US. But in some cases, there are sites that Facebook is showing to users in Europe with an explainer about how data is collected that we in the U.S. can't access. I still was not able to access that, even though I changed my IP using the VPN. So to answer your question, yes, it's a little bit different, and it's kind of tricky, and I haven't found a way around that yet.
Yeah, and I know I think I just read that Facebook says that it's going to be taking these GDPR, their application of the GDPR rules and applying it worldwide, making some sort of changes, but maybe they're setting an example there for others to follow. One question I have, as far as the GDPR is concerned, it requires that companies delete a user's data when that user decides to close an account, and I think users, for better or for worse, are I don't know, maybe not so trustworthy that their data is being deleted. I know for years you could close your account with Facebook, but I would always read those articles that said, yeah, but then I logged in years later and it was still there. How do we know as users, how can we be sure that that's happening? Are there any checks that would be implemented on, that are integrated within the GDPR rules that would aim to check up on that and protect that?
I mean, I think for the most part, we just have to take the companies by their word when they say that they do that, because if they're caught retaining some data after saying they've deleted it permanently, then the consequences are pretty big.
Right.
I mean, your question is, are there any like technical things that the lawmakers can do to check that? I don't think so. You know, I mean, I think if they wanted to go into like really deep investigation, they could have some way of trying to find out, like, using someone's information to see if it remains after that account is deleted. But for now, it's just simply like, it's a law that's pretty unambiguous, right? So when they say they're doing that, when the companies say that they're deleting the data, then all we can really do right now is take their word and take a leap of faith.
Sure.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for joining us. Brian X. Chen is the author of the Tech Fix column at the New York Times. It's a great place to figure out where what you're doing wrong. For example, like deleting those privacy policy emails before reading them. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me again. Take care.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right, we got sad news.
Oh, really?
Stumble
Do we need some more sad trombones?
Yeah, Stumble Upon is dead.
Oh.
It's the 16-year-old internet discovery service that they will shut down in the next few months. Stumble Upon founder Garrett Camp announced on Medium that Stumble Upon will be absorbed by Camp's other product, Mix.com, that, quote, combines social and semantic personalization into one streamlined experience. So theoretically, the makers of Stumble Upon are still in the business of finding you obscure and interesting content, but now they're harnessing the power of all that data you've been tossing up on the web, not to mention all your connections to get those recommendations of stuff that you really want to see or stuff that an algorithm wants you to see.
More likely.
I personally miss the olden days when you could really just stumble on something bizarre on the internet using Stumble Upon or something else, and it had absolutely nothing to do with what a computer thought that you would interest you. It was just random.
It was just completely random.
Yeah.
I know. That was actually a lot of fun, although I'm not sure at what point I forgot that Stumble Upon even existed anymore and stopped stumbling upon things. But it was cool. There was a time where it was like one of my favorite places to go when I was bored. Now we're just so distracted with a million things that boardom rarely happens.
Yeah. Stumble Upon, Delicious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those were the days. Did you call it Delicios?
Well, because the URL was del.ic whatever. So yeah, Delicious or whatever.
Yeah, I called it Delicious. You say Delicios, I say Delicious.
That's the better way to say it. Yeah, I played around a little bit with Mix.com and it kept crashing for me. I'm thinking that maybe either there's a lot of people using it or they haven't scaled up very well and they need to work on that. Or I'm just toxic to technology, which could be the case because I broke somehow just by using it my iMac in the other room. So I think... Yeah, thank you. That's what we needed. A little sad trombone, because it's true. It's sad.
Talking about sad stuff till he found that sound effect.
Yes, I've been dancing around it for at least 2 minutes.
I mean, it's just sort of a sad state of where, when I look back at don't cry. There are a lot of good things on the internet now, but it just seems like there's no surprise anymore.
Yeah, we've seen it all.
Yeah, we have.
We've seen it all. Now we just want to read the news and be depressed by it.
But you can only read the news that's been recommended specifically to you.
That's true.
Based on what you've seen before and looked at and liked. And
it's almost like the internet knows too much about us.
But it does.
So there is no surprise because it's giving us exactly what we want, right?
Well, the important thing is that the internet doesn't know what's in here, in your heart.
Yet. Tech News Weekly records live every Thursday starting at 2:30 p.m. Pacific, 5:30 p.m. Eastern. You can be part of the show by emailing us at tnw@twit.tv. Subscribe to the show at twit.tv/TNW. And I tried to start this on iOS today, so I'll try it here too. It's an acronym. I'm calling HUH. Oh, huh? Huh? I'm very confused. What does that mean?
Huh. Hit us up.
Oh. Huh.
It's not gonna work.
Well,
just hit me up. I'm Megan Maroney on Twitter.
You can us. I'm at Jason Howell on Twitter if you want to us. Thanks to our technical director Josh for the awesome sad trombones when it was needed. Jammer B, Burke, Colleen, everyone who helps us do the show every single week. And thanks to you for joining us for another episode of Tech News Weekly. We'll see y'all next week. Bye, everybody. Huh.